10 locations across the United States where Bigfoot is reported more often than almost anywhere else, plus a few more I could not leave off the map. Some of these names you will know. A couple of them are going to surprise you.
I'm Alex, and if you've spent any time around this channel, you already know the deal. I'm not going to tell you Bigfoot is definitely real, and I'm not going to tell you that everybody who reported it is a liar. We lay out what is actually documented. We bring in the skeptics and we let you yourself make the call. This video is no different.
Our first stop is the place where this entire thing, the word, the legend, the modern obsession, all of it actually began. Number 1, Bluff Creek, in the Six Rivers National Forest of far northern California. If Bigfoot has a birthplace, and I mean the phenomenon, the legend as we understand it today rather than the creature itself, then this is the spot. Go back to the autumn of 1958. A road construction crew is pushing a logging route through the rugged country along Bluff Creek, which is a tributary of the Klamath River. One morning, a tractor operator named Jerry Crew walks up to his equipment and finds it ringed with enormous footprints. 5 toes, human in shape, 16 inches long. Crew did not just laugh it off. He had a plaster cast made of one of the prints, and when a photograph of him holding that cast ran in the local Humboldt Times, a newspaper columnist reached for a nickname for whatever had left it. He called it Bigfoot. That word, the single word this entire channel is built around, was coined right there over a footprint cast in a small California town. Then, 9 years later, the same drainage delivered the most famous piece of footage in the entire history of the subject. On October 20th, 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin were riding on horseback along Bluff Creek when they filmed a tall, dark, hair-covered figure walking across a sandbar. That is the creature now known universally as Patty. 59 seconds of film that has been analyzed, defended, and torn apart for almost 60 years, and still has not been definitively settled either way. The surrounding area leaned all the way into its new identity. The nearby town of Willow Creek calls itself the Bigfoot capital of the world. It has a Bigfoot museum with rows of plaster footprint casts under glass, a giant carved wooden Bigfoot statue, and an annual festival called Bigfoot Days. You can drive a stretch of road officially branded the Scenic Byway. The film site itself was actually lost for decades because a flood reshaped the creek bed and the forest grew back over the spot, and researchers did not relocate and confirm it until around 2011. Now the skeptics side because Bluff Creek has plenty of it. When Ray Wallace, the man who owned that 1958 construction company, died in 2002, members of his family came forward and claimed that he had started the whole thing with a pair of carved wooden feet. That claim is messy, and it does not cleanly explain everything since plenty of reports predate 1958, and we may do an entire video one day just on the Wallace question. But it hangs over this location, and you deserve to know about it. The Patterson-Gimlin film, for its part, has never escaped the man in a costume accusation either. Here's my honest read. Bluff Creek is number 1 on this list, not because it is the most active hotspot today, because it genuinely is not. It is number one because everything else on this map, in a real sense, radiates outward from here. This is the spot that turns scattered backwoods stories into a coast-to-coast phenomenon. Whatever you personally believe happened on that sandbar in 1967, the sheer influence of this one little stretch of California Creek is simply a fact. 2. The Olympic Peninsula, Washington, number 2, takes us north into the state that, by the raw numbers, owns this subject outright. Washington. And our specific stop is the Olympic Peninsula. Let's talk data for a second. Across the BFRO database, Washington sits at the very top of every ranking, with somewhere north of 700 documented reports, comfortably ahead of California in second place and Florida in third. And when you adjust for population, for the fact that relatively few people actually live in Washington, the state pulls even further ahead of the pack. If you were betting purely on the spreadsheet, this is the state you would pick. And the Olympic Peninsula gets named over and over as the epicenter within the epicenter. Picture the place for a moment. It is a thumb of land jutting out into the far northwest corner of the lower 48, wrapped on three sides by water with a temperate rainforest at its core that catches some of the heaviest rainfall anywhere in the country. Olympic National Park and the National Forest around it lock up a huge unbroken block of that terrain. There are valleys in there that almost nobody walks through in a given year. Moss hanging off every branch, light that barely reaches the forest floor at midday, and logging roads that simply run out and stop. The whole place feels, even to a casual hiker, genuinely prehistoric. If you were going to sit down and design, from scratch, a location where a large, shy, undiscovered animal could plausibly stay undiscovered, you would end up building something that looks a great deal like the Olympic Peninsula. Enormous, food-rich, structurally complex, wet, and genuinely under-traveled. That is the believer's case, and honestly, on habitat alone, it is a strong one. There is real space to hide here. But run it through the filter from our intro. The Pacific Northwest is also the cultural homeland of Bigfoot. It is the region where the word Sasquatch enters common American use, where the legend is stitched into the local identity, where there is a Sasquatch on the side of a soda can and woven into the sports culture. And it is also worth remembering that the Pacific Northwest's relationship with this creature did not begin with the BFRO, or with Patterson and Gimlin, or with white settlers at all. The indigenous peoples of this region carried traditions of a wild, hair-covered, human-like being for generations. And the very word Sasquatch is an anglicized version of a word from a Coast Salish language. Long before there was any database to log a sighting in, the forests of this corner of the continent already had a name for whatever lived in them. That depth of tradition is part of what makes the Olympic Peninsula feel like the spiritual center of the subject and not merely the statistical one. Number 3. We stay in Washington and slide down to the southwest corner of the state. Skamania County, home to Mount St. Helens and the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. This is the location with the legal hook I promised you back in the cold open. On April 1, 1969, the Skamania County Commissioners passed Ordinance 69-01. The ordinance made it a crime to kill any creature commonly known as a Sasquatch, a Yeti, a Bigfoot, or a giant hairy ape. And yes, before you say it, the thing passed on April Fool's Day. And county officials at the time went out of their way to insist on the record that it was not a joke. The original version of the ordinance made killing a Sasquatch a felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The county amended it in 1984, softening the penalty down to a gross misdemeanor, which means up to a year in jail and a fine of around $1,000. But here is the part people forget. The ordinance was never repealed. It is still on the books in Skamania County today. So why would a county government do this? Because in the late 1960s, Skamania County was logging so many Sasquatch reports that the commissioners got genuinely worried about armed Bigfoot hunters flooding into the Gifford-Pinchot. Their stated fear was not really about the creature at all. It was that some hunter would see movement in the brush, assume it was a Sasquatch, and shoot an elk hunter or shoot another Bigfoot hunter. The law was a public safety measure wearing the costume of wildlife protection.
And that detail generally matters. A county passing this law does not mean that the government is admitting Bigfoot is real. It is the government admitting that enough of its own residents believed it, enough that people were about to get hurt.
Skamania County also hands us one of the oldest dramatic encounters in all of American Bigfoot lore. In 1924, a group of miners near a canyon on the south side of Mount St. Helens, a place now actually called Ape Canyon, said their cabin was pelted with rocks through the night by large creatures after one of the men reportedly fired a shot at one of them. Fred Beck, one of those miners, wrote about the whole ordeal in detail decades later. And the sightings in this region go back further still, into the 1850s, with accounts from the area's earliest white settlers and the indigenous peoples who were there long before them. The skeptics' note here is straightforward and it is fair. A long, deep history of reports, plus a famous law, plus a county chamber of commerce that now actively markets the place as a Sasquatch refuge, is a feedback loop. Fame generates reports, and reports generate more fame. Skamania is genuinely Squatchy country by any measure, but it is also a place that now has every commercial incentive in the world to stay that way. Number 4. We cross south into Oregon, into the Blue Mountains, and into what is, for a lot of serious researchers, the most interesting physical evidence location on this entire list. Oregon does not always grab headlines the way that Washington and California do, but make no mistake, it is a heavyweight in this subject. It ranks near the top of the country in total reports, and on a per capita basis, some analyses place it second only to Washington itself. The Blue Mountains, which run through the northeast of the state and spill over the line into Washington, are the part of Oregon that comes up again and again. But what makes this particular spot matter is not a sighting, it is footprints. In 1982, a United States Forest Service patrolman named Paul Freeman reported finding tracks in the Blue Mountains, and the casts taken from that area showed something that caught the attention of genuinely serious people. They appeared to show dermal ridges, skin texture, the fine looping detail you would see on the sole of a real foot, somehow preserved in the impression. The late Idaho State University anatomist Jeff Meldrum, a name longtime viewers of this channel know very well, and a researcher we sadly lost in 2025, studied casts like these and argued that ridge detail at that scale would be extraordinarily difficult to fake. The anthropologist Grover Krantz took the Freeman material seriously as well, so this is the location where the Bigfoot question stops being only about blurry shapes in the far distance and starts being about something you can physically hold in your hands and put under a microscope. And there is a second piece to the footprint argument that often gets lost. It is not just individual prints, it is trackways. A trackway is a long, continuous line of prints, sometimes dozens of them in a row, walking through soft ground. To fake a single print, you need a carved fake foot and a quiet afternoon. To fake a genuinely convincing trackway, you need that whole line of prints to show consistent, natural variation in depth and stride across uneven terrain, with the body weight shifting the way it shifts in a living thing that actually walks. Skeptics and believers honestly disagree about how hard that is to pull off, but it is a real and serious part of why locations like the Blue Mountains keep researchers up at night. And here is where the Honest Channel has to do its actual job. Paul Freeman was a deeply polarizing figure. Over the following years, he went on to produce more tracks and more footage, and a lot of people inside this field, including committed believers, came to suspect that at least some of his later material was hoaxed. That cloud is real, and it is a big part of why the Blue Mountains evidence has never converted the scientific mainstream. I will tell you where I personally land on it. I find the dermal ridge argument one of the more genuinely compelling threads in this entire subject. It is the kind of evidence that, if it holds up, is very hard to explain away. But I cannot fully separate that evidence from the man who provided it, and frankly, neither can anyone else. That unresolved tension is the Blue Mountains in a single sentence, compelling and clouded at the exact same time. Number 5. We go back into California, but a completely different California. East and up, the Sierra Nevada. When most people think of Bigfoot in California, they picture the wet, coastal redwood country up around Bluff Creek. The Sierra Nevada is the other side of the state's geography entirely. It is a long, high spine of granite and pine, bone dry in summer, buried under deep snow in winter. And it carries two separate threads worth your time. One of them is ancient, and one of them is modern. The ancient thread is rock art, On the Tule River Indian Reservation, in the southern Sierra foothills, there is a site called Painted Rock, and among its painted figures is one that local tradition calls the Hairy Man. He is depicted alongside what reads clearly as a family. A larger figure, a mid-sized one, and a small child-sized one. The art is old. It is far older than any modern Bigfoot craze, and the Tule River people have their own long-standing oral traditions about a tall, hair-covered being living in that country. Whatever you ultimately make of it, you simply cannot explain that pictograph as someone copying a 1967 movie. The timeline does not allow for it. To me, that is one of the more quietly powerful things in this whole subject. And it is exactly the kind of indigenous tradition material we have always tried to treat with respect on this channel. The modern thread is sound. In the 1970s, a group of men spending extended time at a remote camp in the Sierra recorded what came to be known as the Sierra Sounds. Long stretches of strange vocalizations, chattering, and what some listeners insist carries the structure of an actual language. Those recordings were later studied by people with serious audio analysis backgrounds, who argued that the sounds did not match a known animal and were not obviously faked. We may give the Sierra Sounds their own dedicated video down the line, because the audio evidence angle is one we have honestly never dug into properly. The skeptics' case here is real, so let's say it plainly. Rock art interpretation is notoriously slippery. A hairy man to one set of eyes can be something else entirely to another. And audio is just about the easiest evidence in the world to misjudge, because the night woods are absolutely full of sounds, owls, foxes, coyotes, and elk that are genuinely unsettling and genuinely hard to identify if you do not already know them by ear. The Sierra Nevada earns its spot on this list, but it earns it with real question marks attached. And honestly, that is true of the entire list. Number 6. We leave the West entirely now and drop down into the dense, humid, tangled bottomland of East Texas. The Big Thicket. Texas is a reliable top 10 state in the BFRO numbers, and the Big Thicket is the part of Texas that has carried this reputation the longest. And I want to be clear, because Texas confuses people here. This is not desert Texas. The Big Thicket is a thick weave of pine and hardwood, swamp and creek bottom, so botanically dense and varied that biologists have called it a biological crossroads. A substantial chunk of it is now protected as the Big Thicket National Preserve. What I personally love about this location is the language. Long before anyone in East Texas had ever heard the word Bigfoot, the local people already had their own names for whatever it was they kept running into out in those woods. They called it the Wild Man. They called it the Raggedy Man. And my personal favorite of all of them, they called it O.L. Mossyback. Those names go back generations. And to me, that is a meaningful little detail. When you find that a remote region developed its own homegrown vocabulary for a creature independently before the national legend ever rolled into town, that is at the very least worth pausing on for a moment. It suggests people were describing something by their own lights well before pop culture handed them a script. There's also a quality to the Big Thicket itself that is hard to convey unless you have actually stood inside it. For much of its history, this was country that swallowed people. It was a refuge for outlaws, for Civil War draft dodgers, for anyone who wanted to vanish, precisely because the vegetation is so dense and the terrain so disorienting that you can genuinely lose your bearings within sight of a road. A landscape that can reliably hide a fugitive human being is, at the very minimum, a landscape worth thinking carefully about when the conversation turns to a large animal that does not want to be found. The encounter reports out of the Big Thicket run very true to that older pattern. Upright, hair-covered animals, very often described crossing creek bottoms or remote logging roads, and frequently paired with screams and howls that experienced woodsmen. People who genuinely know every animal that lives in those woods will tell you flatly that they cannot place. The skeptic's note, and it is a real one, is about bears. East Texas bottomland is also prime habitat for black bears, which have been steadily expanding back into the region, and a bear standing upright or pushing through thick brush at a distance is a classic, well-documented source of misidentification. The Big Thicket is genuinely wild, genuinely underexplored country. But it is also exactly the kind of terrain where a fleeting glimpse of a real, known animal can quietly grow into something much bigger in the retelling. Number 7. Staying in the south-central part of the country, we move to the Ouachita Mountains, a rugged, heavily forested range that straddles the line between Oklahoma and Arkansas. Now, longtime viewers, this is a place you already know, because we devoted an entire video to a piece of trail camera footage that came out of these very mountains. Think of this section as the wider context around that story. The Ouachitas earn their place on this list for a reason that almost nothing else here can claim. Actual, sustained, organized scientific fieldwork. A group called the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, the NAWAC, which grew out of an earlier organization called the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy, identified a remote, privately owned site deep in the Ouachitas that they refer to only as Area X. And they did not just go and visit it once or twice. They studied it seriously for years. From 2006 to 2011, they ran a project they called Operation Forest Vigil, keeping arrays of high-end camera traps running continuously across the area. Then they deliberately shifted tactics, moving to long-term human field studies. They rotated teams of researchers in and out, living on site for stretches at a time, and they kept detailed written logs of everything. And what those logs describe is remarkably consistent and, frankly, hard to wave away casually. Rocks repeatedly striking the cabin roofs at night, distinct wood knocks echoing through the dark, and vocalizations that team members, many of them with scientific or military backgrounds, say they simply could not match to any animal they knew.
Let me be fair to both sides on this. Years of disciplined field work by serious people, and still no body, still no bones or specimen. A skeptic says this absence is the whole answer, but a believer says it just proves how careful the animal is. So, what do you think?
That is the honest tension of the Ouachitas. It is, in my opinion, the closest thing this entire subject has to a long-term field laboratory, and it has produced years of compelling, maddening, and ultimately inconclusive observation. Nobody has walked out of those mountains with the thing that would end the debate, but nobody has walked out able to comfortably explain away what those teams logged either. If you have not yet seen our Ouachita Trail cam breakdown, go and watch it right after this one. It lives inside this exact landscape, and the two videos genuinely complete each other. Number 8. And we keep heading east into a state that surprises people every single time it comes up in this conversation. Ohio. Ohio is genuinely not a place most people picture when they picture Bigfoot. There is no rainforest here. There is no towering mountain wilderness. And yet Ohio sits right near the very top of the national rankings, 4th in the entire country in total reports, behind only Washington, California, and Florida. That fact alone should make you stop and recalibrate your whole mental map of this phenomenon. The center of gravity for Ohio Bigfoot is Salt Fork State Park, over in the southeastern part of the state. Salt Fork is the largest state park in all of Ohio. Thousands of acres of rolling woods, ridges, and a big reservoir. And it has become so tightly associated with the creature that it has a hiking trail informally tied to the legend, and it hosts the long-running Ohio Bigfoot Conference, which is one of the bigger gatherings of its kind anywhere in the country. The regional name for the creature here is the Grassman. And if the Grassman rings a bell for you, it absolutely should, because we recently did a full deep dive on a cluster of Ohio sightings and the Grassman tradition that sits behind them. So I'm not going to rerun all of that material here. If you happen to miss it, it is on the channel, and it pairs very well with this video. What Ohio really illustrates, better than almost anywhere else on this list, is the eastern, mixed forest, surprisingly close to people version of this story. These are mostly not sightings from the howling, trackless wilderness. They are sightings from second-growth woods that sit within an easy afternoon's drive of major cities, and that proximity changes the whole texture of the encounters. Ohio reports are full of things the deep wilderness accounts simply are not. A creature seen at the edge of a soybean field. Something crossing a rural two-lane road in a set of headlights. A tall shape moving along the tree line behind a farmhouse at dusk. It is a more domestic kind of strange, a Bigfoot reported not in some untouched cathedral of old-growth timber, but at the ragged seam where ordinary American life presses right up against the woods. Whatever you make of it, that is a genuinely different flavor of report, and Ohio produces it in real volume. The skeptic reads that one way. That is a pure population effect. More people plus more woodland edges equals more reports, full stop, end of story. The believer reads it the other way. The eastern forests of this country have quietly recovered an enormous amount of tree cover over the last 100 years, far more than people realize, and maybe, just maybe, something recovered right along with them. Ohio is the location where you get to decide which of those two stories you personally find more persuasive. Number 9. Pennsylvania, and specifically a long forested spine running through the southwest of the state called Chestnut Ridge. Pennsylvania is a strong report state with well over 100 documented encounters on the books, and Chestnut Ridge, which runs through Westmoreland, Fayette, and Indiana counties, is its single most storied corridor. The name most tightly associated with this region is Stan Gordon, a researcher who has been collecting and investigating reports here since 1959. That is more than 6 decades on one beat. He runs a sighting hotline. He has personally interviewed thousands of witnesses over his career. The defining chapter for this region is the year 1973. That summer, Western Pennsylvania experienced a genuine documented outbreak of Bigfoot reports. And strangely, it coincided with one of the largest waves of UFO sightings the state had ever recorded. The two phenomena overlapped in time and in place, and that overlap pushed Gordon over the years that followed toward a far stranger interpretation of what Bigfoot might actually be. We have explored that high strangeness angle in its own dedicated video, and I would point you there rather than relitigate the whole thing now. For the purposes of this list, I want to keep Chestnut Ridge grounded and terrestrial. So take Gordon's more exotic interpretation as one view among several, and not as any kind of settled conclusion. What is genuinely not in dispute is the activity itself. Reports out of the Derry Township area have continued decade after decade after decade so consistently that Derry Borough went ahead and officially named Bigfoot its town cryptid.
Places like Chestnut Ridge taught me something about this channel. The comment section is the real archive. So if you have seen something anywhere, tell me in the comments. A comment down there has become a full video more than once.
And the skeptic's note on Chestnut Ridge is honestly an important one. A region that has a famous, media-savvy investigator running an open public hotline for more than 60 straight years is, almost by definition, going to accumulate a very large pile of reports. Visibility creates volume. That is just how it works. But 6 decades of stubborn consistency concentrated in one small corridor is still a genuinely striking thing to sit with. While you are down in those comments, by the way, if you are finding this road trip worthwhile, subscribing genuinely does help the channel keep making videos exactly like this one, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Okay. One main stop left on the list, and it trades the cold mountain forest for a hot green swamp. Number 10. Our final stop on the main list takes us about as far from a Pacific Northwest rainforest as you can possibly get and still be inside the same country. The Florida Everglades. Florida ranks 3rd nationally in Bigfoot reports, behind only Washington and California, and that fact surprises just about everyone the first time they hear it. But Florida's version of the creature has its own name, and frankly its own personality. Down here, it is not the Sasquatch. Down here, it is the skunk ape. The skunk ape is generally described as a little smaller than the classic Pacific Northwest Bigfoot, reddish-brown in color. And then there is the signature feature, the one the name comes from. It is reported as being accompanied by an absolutely overwhelming stench, something witnesses tend to compare to rotten eggs, wet dog, and sulfur all mixed together. It gets reported all across the state, but the true heartland is the South. The Everglades, the Big Cypress Preserve, and the wetlands around the Myakka River. The single most famous Florida case is the one known as the Myakka photos. Around the turn of the millennium in 2000 and 2001, a woman in Sarasota County mailed 2 photographs to her local sheriff's office, along with a letter explaining that a large, ape-like animal had been raiding her back porch for apples on multiple nights. She actually thought it might be an escaped orangutan. The images, which show a hunched, shaggy figure with a wide, gaping mouth, became some of the most heavily analyzed cryptid photographs in America. And more than 2 decades later, they have never been definitively proven a hoax and never been definitively explained. Florida also has a dedicated hub for all of this. The Skunk Ape Research Headquarters down in Okeechobee, run by a man named Dave Shealy, who has spent essentially his entire life out in those swamps chasing the animal, and the tradition here runs much deeper than the modern name. The Seminole people have long spoken of the Esti Kapkaki, the tall man, living out in that very same country. Now, Florida's skeptical case is unusually strong, and I am not going to soft pedal it for you. State wildlife officials attribute skunk ape reports to misidentified wildlife, to outright hoaxes, and this part really matters, to escaped primates. Florida's warm climate genuinely is home to primate breeding and research facilities, and exotic animals genuinely do get loose down there from time to time. So when somebody reports a large ape moving through the Florida wilderness, the explanation escaped captive primate is not a lazy, dismissive handwave. It is a real, documented thing that has actually happened in that state. The Everglades makes this list because the reports here are numerous and old and persistent. But it might also be the single location on the whole map where the mundane explanation is the most plausible. The Honest Channel says that part out loud. Before we land the plane, I promised you a few more because the truth is the map is a lot bigger than 10 pins, and there are locations that did not quite crack the main 10 but absolutely deserve a mention. First, Sister Lakes, Michigan. Michigan is a quietly strong report state that does not get talked about enough, and the southwestern corner of it produced a genuine flap back in the mid-1960s. A real run of sightings around the Sister Lakes area drew national press coverage, busloads of curiosity seekers, and even informal armed hunting parties combing the woods. Michigan's vast, lightly populated Upper Peninsula continues to generate reports right up to the present day. Second, the Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina. The Uwharries are an ancient, worn-down mountain range in the central part of the state, and they anchor North Carolina's Bigfoot tradition. The state even has its own named local creature from the late 1970s, a Bigfoot known as Nobby, sighted in Cleveland County, who picked up real local news coverage at the time. Third, the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. The Rocky Mountains do not dominate the rankings the way the coastal ranges do, but Colorado keeps the legend alive, including a 2023 sighting that was filmed by tourists from a moving train as it wound through the San Juans. That clip spread widely online and served as a sharp reminder that this phenomenon is not some dusty relic stuck in the 1970s. It is still going. 3 more pins, and honestly, if I wanted to, I could have given you 30.
So where do I land? I genuinely think it is both. A lot of this is misidentification and legend. I do not think you can look at it honestly and deny that. But there are many cases still not explained by people. And that reminder is why I keep making these. I genuinely think we still have so much more to learn about what is out there.
That is the list. If your spot got left off the map, the comments are wide open, so tell me where you would have put your pin. And just as importantly, Tell me why. Maybe your location is the next deep dive on this channel. Thank you for taking the road trip with me. I will see you in the next one.